Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast. I'm Nathan, one of your hosts, and I'm so happy to be joined today by Seth Hanford, the head of school of the Elgin Academy. And Seth, I'm really excited because we actually often interview people who are here in the city, and you're in the suburbs. So
Mhm.
even though a lot of people like to say that's the city, we really know it's Chicago region, but we're excited to have you join us and to share about what you're doing out there in the suburbs.
Great. Yeah, thank you for having me. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. So first, let's talk about head of school. What does that
Sure.
mean? Is that like a principal?
Yeah, basically it's like a principal. So we're a
Okay.
preschool through 12 school.
Okay.
And so we have kids all the way from between the ages of 3 and 18.
Sure.
And so I am the head of the entire school. And then we have directors at the different
Okay.
age levels. So that those are kind of like the principal. This job would be maybe a little bit like a combination of a superintendent and a principal kind of thing. So that's sort of what
Sure.
the head of school does.
So 3 years old to 18 years old is a
Yeah.
huge
Yeah.
span, and obviously like school districts, we're used to seeing that with school districts where they have pre-K.
Right.
But usually they're broken up a little more, and so you'll see, like in my school district back home, it's K through five or K through four, fifth and sixth, seventh and eighth, and then high school. So for you,
Sure.
having that huge a span of kids in one area, was that a conscious decision, or was it just kind of how it started?
Well, so a little bit of both, honestly. I mean, so the
Okay,
school Elgin Academy is over 180 years old. So we
yeah,
were chartered way back in 1839 out here in Elgin by the city fathers, basically.
wow,
And but we haven't been that grade range the entire time, obviously. So the our early childhood program is relatively new in the big scheme of things, but we're also a multiple building campus. So
okay,
if you came out here, you would feel a little bit like you were in a college quad, kind of, for people who have
okay,
that image. Think back to college and sort of that center area of the campus that a lot of places have. So we're a number of buildings surrounding a quad. So while we have um, a lot of a wide age range, we are spread out across a campus where people are in different places, and there's some
yeah.
shared spaces, but generally separate by age somewhat.
Do those kids ever interact, the older and the younger kids? Is there any like sort of mentoring or any sort of interaction with those age groups?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We actually think that's one of the great reasons to be at Elgin Academy, is that
Mm,
there is a lot of interaction
yeah,
between the kids of different ages. So obviously that varies by appropriateness, but
right.
there's shared spaces. So that's one way in which people interact. All of our kids go into one of the central buildings almost every day in order to do various things they might do. Even the 3-year-olds might go in there to have their art class, for example. So there's casual interactions, which are really cool. And then there's some more formal interactions that take place in, like what you called mentoring. We have a house system where kids from fourth grade and up are in various houses with
Mm.
kids through the whole span. So there's a lot of chance for kids of different ages to interact, which is a really great thing about being on a campus like this.
Yeah. Is it are there dorms there, or is it
So sorry, I didn't mean to. So
no,
we
you're good.
do not have dorms here now. One of two of our buildings are actually converted dorms. So historically,
Okay.
we have had boarders. We have not had those since the late 1970s, I think, or early 1980s.
Okay.
We do have some international students who are here on homestay, so they live with some families.
Okay.
But right now we do not have a specific boarding program like some schools do.
When I was learning about Elgin Academy, one of the themes there was taking learning personally. I mean, it's
Yeah.
bolded in several areas. And so it's one of those things like it really stands out. And so it makes you go, okay, taking learning personally, what does that mean to Elgin Academy? And what does it mean to the teachers and staff there?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you for asking that, because I think that's such a signature thing
Yeah.
for us. So there's a couple of different levels at which that happens, and it's a little bit more complicated than it sounds, in the sense of what it's not is you and I are in the same class and you're working on one thing and I'm working on a totally,
Hmm.
we're in math together and you're smarter than I am and you're working on a worksheet that's, this level and I'm here. That's not really what it means. What it means to us is that the learning that is happening is really based in relationships. So our
Yeah.
classes are small
Okay.
and our teachers know our students and their families, and we really are working in a partnership,
Yeah.
right? So if we're in that same math class, you are able, you might be working a little more independently than I am. I might need a little bit more of a push. um, the risks we might be able to take are a little different. You may be working on something and I'm working on something in that concept that's a little bit different.
Hmm.
But all of that is based in the knowledge that that teacher has of who I am as a learner,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
what not only what my goals are, but what my abilities are, and how well I'm doing. And so the curriculum, um, while traditional in some ways, can also be shaped by that a little bit. So
Okay.
it's a good mix of those things, we think. And that's what we mean when we talk about what it means to learn, to really learn personally.
Yeah, and I think that it's tough because I'm sure as a parent, trying to figure out where your kid's going to go to school, uh, where they're going to be educated, make friends, have all these life experiences. There's so many things that you're considering, and I think that every educator wants to provide kids with the best opportunity, but the resources aren't always there to do that. I know I mean, probably most teachers are spending their own money
Sure.
to resource kids, to buy the extra school supplies, to do whatever they need to do in order for these kids to be able to succeed. So for you, how do you look at resources and say, okay, how do we determine what resources we're going to provide? And do you change that up if you're seeing like, okay, they are responding to this, or the teachers are saying that's not really, helping us reach the goals that you have for us?
So I think that that's a really it's a fantastic question and a really complex question, because
Mm,
if you think of some of what the struggles are in American education, right? One of those areas, if we're to be frank, is that we fund as a society education through property taxes, and
right.
as
Yeah.
a in general, that has really obvious ramifications, right?
Right.
Because of the way tax bases in different places work. When you add on to that there's a system that is around that has to do with elected school boards and things like that, you end up with a resource allocation that may or may not serve kids well, and that's nobody's fault. That's really systemic, right? So that's not meant to be a shot on any one system as opposed to another. As an independent school, we can make those decisions about resource allocation.
Mm,
um, uh, we are governed by an independent board of trustees. So we're a legal entity. And we are governed by a board of trustees that is a self perpetuating board of trustees. So there's a
okay.
nomination process, and
Okay.
there's a process by which new board members come on. So we are beholden to that group, right? So we can't make. I couldn't say tomorrow, hey, you know what? We're gonna do this crazy curricular thing over here
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
without we're governed by a board, and we're also governed by the market, right? So people choose to come here and they pay tuition to come here.
Right.
Nobody comes to Elgin Academy because they live in that house that you'd see if I turn the camera out that window, right? They
Yeah.
go to another school.
Okay.
So if we're offering something that isn't meeting people's needs, they're not going to come, and we're not going to exist,
Right.
because that's where we generate the resources. The other thing I would say to your question is that as an independent school and as a small school, we can be very responsive to what teachers see in the classroom.
Mm.
So for this group, if this modification to the curriculum is the right thing, our teachers have the power to do that. They don't do that individually. There's different systems like departments and the divisions that I described before. But in general, we can make decisions that are based on the level at which they're happening by the people who are in those classrooms every day,
Okay. Yeah.
as opposed to me making that decision about what's going on right now in the third grade classroom
Right.
with a great distance from what's happening there.
Yeah.
That allows us to be really agile and adaptable, and I think that's a really important part of what makes an independent school a good place.
So you had me thinking about this, and I think it kind of ties in there as well because I remember from growing up that a lot of teachers felt pressure to perform in the way of standardized testing, right? It's
Right,
like
right,
that's how they determined if the kids and the teachers were successful.
right.
Um, and that's a lot of pressure to put on both the kids and the teachers and the staff coming around them to to, to perform on tests when some people just simply aren't good test takers, and there's so much information that it's like, well, do you teach so that they pass the tests, or do you teach so that they
Right.
learn about life things and how to think on their own and all those things? So for you and for Elgin Academy, um, has that been something that you've had to deal with? Has it been a struggle, or how do you kind of see that, at least through your lens?
Yeah. So that is another kind of conundrum that's built into the American system, because
Yeah,
so much of how we figure out whether schools are good is based on performance on various standardized tests.
yeah,
Standardized tests are a snapshot, right? So it's the equivalent of just taking a picture of a moment,
yeah,
right? And,
right,
and that moment could have a million different factors to it,
right,
right? I didn't get a good night's sleep before. I didn't eat a good breakfast. I'm in a bad mood. I had an altercation with with my friend on the bus, and I'm bummed out. All of
yeah,
those
yeah,
kinds of things are very much affect kids, because schools are social environments, right? So all of like you're alluding to, all of those things happen. So in our situation, while we do standardized testing at certain levels, we have a way that we use those. So
okay,
we will use those to say, okay, well, how did you do, Nathan, last year? How are you doing this year? What's your progress been? Do we see some things we like? Do we see some things where we want to say, boy, we want to really put a plan into place to help you move from here to
mm,
here in terms
mm-hmm.
of your reading, that kind of thing. So they can be useful when used in that context. For us, there honestly is not much of a dilemma there. We know how we want to use them. Because we're not getting state funding, we're not obligated to report them anywhere. We can
Okay,
use them the way we need to use them to help kids move along.
yeah,
The only exception to all that is just that the role they play in kids getting into college when you
right,
get to those 18-year-olds, right? And
right,
that's an interesting thing that's really changing and COVID has affected that. And
right,
so there's a lot of subtlety to that part of it. But that is a dilemma, I think, for our system, but it's not a dilemma for us. Our teachers don't teach to a test, except in very, very rare circumstances where our seniors and juniors in high school might be taking an advanced placement test that
yeah,
could help them have college credit.
okay. So it's not the testing necessarily that is right or wrong. It's just if you're using those in the right way, I think it can be a good thing.
I, I don't know that I would, were I an elected official, which I am not, and nobody has asked me to be, I would, I don't know that. I appreciate the desire to try to even the playing field so that our schools are uniformly serving kids,
Yeah,
right? So that's what people are trying to do when they apply standardized tests to measure a school, right? Are
Okay.
the schools in this neighborhood getting the same results as the schools in this neighborhood?
Right.
I would rather see our society go at that question by thinking about how we fund schools and how we support schools. I don't know that tests give that snapshot that you want,
Yeah.
that what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But there's a test is one measure among many of how kids are doing.
I so as you're sharing that, I'm thinking about the perspective that people have on private schools.
Yeah,
Because you talked about are the kids in this neighborhood doing as well as kids in that neighborhood, and you mentioned that
yeah,
it's not for you, it's not a neighborhood thing. It's not just the kids that are in your neighborhood coming into your school. They come from all over the world. But there's this perception that private schools are supposed to be better schools,
yeah.
or
They're
they're supposed to
elitist.
be for the elite kids,
Yeah.
or kids of elite parents. So
Hmm.
how do you look at that perspective and kind of interact with that, and how does that um, how does that affect the way that you interact with your community and with the people that are your neighbors whose kids may not be going to your school?
Yeah. So we are very intent here on making this education accessible to anybody who wants to come to a place that has this mission.
Okay.
So we give a tremendous amount of financial aid in any given school year. So we might give an amount that's nearing $2 million in a lot of
Oh,
school years to help make sure that this education is accessible. So
okay.
we are very committed to that. Our school has been in Elgin, and some people who are listening to this or who will listen to this may be familiar with Elgin, and others aren't. It's a fantastically vibrant city of about a little over 100,000. Um, and we have been in this spot in Elgin for our entire existence.
Oh,
So
okay.
we're very committed to being here where we are. We're very committed to our relationship with a fantastic city. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we are very committed to making this accessible to the people who we think can benefit from it. So, my point about the neighborhood is just more that we always know as an independent school that nobody comes here because they have to or because they
Yeah.
bought a house in a certain place.
Right.
But we aspire to be um, as accessible as we can possibly be to a wide range of socioeconomic and race and all manner of diversity. You cannot prepare kids to go into a world successfully without having that emphasis.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally understand, and I think that it's amazing that you provide that level of resources for kids whose parents may not be able to provide it themselves, but they still have that same those same goals, and the same desire to be a part of the community and to do something that's bigger. Because I know college still is like, okay, you go to high school, you go grade school, junior high, high school, college. But I think we are starting to see the trend where it's less about like you have to do it in this order, more
Right.
about like what what is that kid good at, what are their goals, and how do they reach those goals. And that might mean trade school, it might mean they
Hmm.
may not need to go to any sort of secondary school after high school.
Hmm.
And so have you seen that trend kind of change in your school and the goals that the kids that are coming there have?
Yeah. So that's I think you're diagnosing really accurately a trend in education in general.
Okay.
I think our mission is always going to be very predominantly kids who see their next step as being college,
Okay.
and almost always 4 year college. That's been historically our mission. So it doesn't mean nobody ever goes to a community college. That's
Yeah.
would be untrue. Elgin Community College, right down the road from us, is a fantastic place, and we have kids who go there in some years. Most years, though, And this year, for example, the all of our kids are intending to enroll in a 4-year college.
Okay.
Having said that, we are thinking people are being very thoughtful about the college choice, whether to go to college. So we have that conversation more than we had it in the past,
Okay.
right? Is that worth it? You don't have to go, you don't have to search really hard online to find different analyses about what would happen if I took the money I'm going to spend to go to Northwestern for 4 years and I invested that in my business.
Yeah.
How
Yep.
much more mileage would I get out of that, right? So you don't have to get very far on the internet to find those sorts of things. People ask those questions. They also ask questions about, is paying $250,000 for a 4-year education, do I need to do that? Or what about this place that gave me more support where it's going to cost me 100 and I don't need a
Yeah.
loan?
Yeah.
Or a state school that provides a fantastic program in what I'm interested in, where the cost is going to be a lot less to me and I'm going to come out in a different financial situation than I would
Yeah.
if I went somewhere else. So we see it in those sorts of questions a lot.
Yeah, and it's tough because you can understand it from both perspectives, where it's like,
Oh,
okay,
completely.
why am I going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to start working and start working owing hundreds of thousands of dollars? It's like you're
Right.
actually starting from less than zero
Right.
versus I can
Right.
just start working, use whatever
Right.
money I have to, you know, like you said, invest in something else, whether it be a house, a vehicle to get to work, whatever the case may be,
Right.
and
Right.
start at least at zero. But that really isn't it isn't the true accurate picture of what that means, because for some kids both those things are going to be right for
Right.
different
That,
kids.
yeah, I mean, we definitely think that's right, and this idea, though, that every American kid should go to a 4-year college, we don't think is necessarily right.
Okay.
If so, if your aspiration isn't college, there are a lot of great places for you. We are
Yeah.
right in the middle of a very vibrant and strong school district here. But even if Elgin Academy isn't the right place, there are right places, and there have to be right places for kids for whom college isn't going to be the
Yeah.
next thing.
Yeah.
From our standpoint, I think what we're really conscious of is that when our kids go off to college, what's going to make them successful, so that if they do invest, when they do invest that money in college, what's going to make that experience really work for them. So there's a whole set of habits, and there's a lot of 18-year-olds who think they know what they're going to do who don't, right? I'm going to go to college and I want
Right.
to be a doctor, and I start taking science classes and I realize I really like this instead of medicine, and I'm going to go this direction.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was going to be a lawyer, but I really love this. So that happens all the time. What's going to carry you through all that? Well, it's certain habits like being able to think critically, being able to advocate for yourself, being able to operate within a team environment, all of those skills that are really going to make you successful when you get into that career, whether you do that at 18 or 25 because you went to 7 years of college and graduate school, is almost not relevant to that part of it.
Yeah.
And so we spend a lot of time thinking not only about, what am I learning? What are our kids learning in the biology class in terms of those facts, but also what are they learning about being in a group? What are they learning about how to think? What are they learning about themselves? Those are the things that are going to help you make the decisions you're talking about effectively.
Okay. That absolutely makes sense, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that people are really thinking about those things, because I think about, well, what would I do differently? And I mean, you never know. Like you said,
Right.
there's
Right.
people have plans, and sometimes they work and sometimes they
Right.
don't, and they
Right.
often don't work out, at least not the exact way we thought they were going to.
So
Um,
so then so then the question is, and I apologize for interrupting,
oh
but then
no, go right ahead.
what we think the important part of that is what is it that's going to allow me to effectively change course?
Yeah.
My plan isn't working. How do I know
Okay.
that? What do I do when it's not working? What are the
Yeah.
resources around me to help me? What do I know about myself that's going to help me make that adjustment? all of those things are probably more important than any one thing I learn in any one class.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what good is that knowledge if you don't have the things around it to apply it?
That's a great thought, and I think that yeah, you can definitely see people thinking a lot more about those things. And it's funny because sometimes, I see these things where people are like, "Oh, I learned the Pythagorean theorem in high school, but I don't know how to do my taxes." And it's like,
Right,
well,
right.
unless you're a tax accountant or a tax professional, no one knows how to do their taxes really. Uh, so I think it is like learning that balance of what's important for life and what's important academically, and kind of integrating that into the curriculum. But then having it be a dynamic one where you're always looking at it and saying, okay, is this still the best thing for these kids? I think
Right,
is
right.
what you're doing is really important.
So as an independent school, our hope is that we can get that balance right, and that
Mm,
in the places where we're not, that we can adapt to make sure we are.
okay.
That's part of what our system ought to allow us to do, and what we've done historically.
Yeah. I want to ask you about social responsibility, because I think one of the really cool things is we're seeing more and more younger people starting to understand what social responsibility is, what social justice is, and starting to learn how to integrate that into their own lives, and understanding like that person looks different, sounds different, so they are dealing with things that are different than the things that I'm dealing with. And sometimes those things are not because of what they've done, but because of how they look or who they are, and that's not fair. And so for you, do you see this with the kids there? And then how does Elgin Academy kind of look at their social responsibility and act on that?
Yeah. So we certainly do look at that as a big part of a lot of things that we actually just you and I just spoke about.
Yeah,
That part of part of leaving your education and moving into the world is to have those understandings as you describe them, and to understand who with whom you are interacting all of the time.
yeah,
And so we've always been a very service based school. So we have a long, deep history of doing what has been traditionally called in schools community service, and so we've always been deeply ingrained in the Elgin itself, and in this region, and even internationally. We before COVID, we had a a trip that would go internationally over spring break, that sometimes
uh,
a third of our high school kids would go on, our upper school kids, in any one year, to help teach English at an orphanage in places like Nicaragua or the Dominican Republic.
hmm,
So all of that service is really, really important. um, and we're beginning to look like a lot of schools at that, in a little bit of a different way, and shifting into what is called service learning,
yeah,
which is a deeper understanding of not only what, if somebody's cold and I want to collect coats, that's great, but why? What is the systemic issue that prevents them from getting a coat in the way that I was able to go buy this one?
yeah,
Right. So there's that element of service. I think even more important than that is there is the element of inclusivity that you're talking about. And this is something we're thinking a lot about here at the Academy. And how do we ensure that we are a truly inclusive environment where everybody has the same access to all of the opportunities that it means to go to a place like Elgin Academy?
yeah,
And we think that those lessons are very, very important. When it gets right down to it, what our kids need to do, like our all kids need, is to be able to go out into the world and interact effectively and understand. And we reject the idea. People talk about tolerance, and this is not about tolerating. This is about embracing,
yeah.
and that's a really important difference.
Okay,
We are continuing, like all schools, to grow in that way, and that's exceedingly important.
yeah. I kind of equate this community service to service learning thing the same way as people look at sympathy and empathy, where it's like community service and sympathy are about, okay, I feel bad because I see that they don't have the same thing, so I'm gonna try and do something to make that better. I'm gonna clean up the
To
park,
help them
or I'm
have
gonna
it.
say I'm sorry, or like sorry for your loss. Whereas like service learning and empathy is more, you're putting yourself in their place, and you're saying, okay, you know, these outside factors are affecting your life in this way, and it means that you're not getting the same resources, and I need to do something about that because my seat at the table is different than yours. And so
Mhm.
I think that from a lot of the different people that I get to interact with, I'm really seeing how people are going from, this isn't like, I'm not doing this because I feel bad for you. I'm doing this because people are not seeing you for who you are, and the good that you
Mhm.
do in the community, and the good that you do, that you bring to this American zeitgeist, where it's like we would not be who we are as a country and as a culture if the individual people don't get to be who they are and don't get to have the same resources to be the future person that they're going to be, the same way that everyone else does.
I mean, I think that's brilliantly said, and that um, as a school that considers itself and that is, we hope, really relationship based,
Hmm.
authentic relationships are at the heart of everything you just talked about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if you and I have a relationship, I am I'm going to I can't have a relationship with you if I think, well, you don't have X and that's your fault because whatever, right? But if we have an authentic relationship where we understand each other and we truly care about one another, that's a totally different environment, and
Yeah.
that's got to be the basis of everything that we're talking about as a society, I think.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, I think that those relationships are definitely cornerstones to that. And I get
Yeah.
really excited to hear about kids that are kind of starting to understand that and starting to integrate that into their lives, because I think
Yep.
that, I have nieces and nephews that are grade school age, and I get excited when things click for them. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
that, like, so that's really cool. I
Well,
want
you
to give
should
you,
send them to Elgin Academy.
yeah,
We can help them.
I don't. They're pretty far. They're like down by Joliet, so that'd be quite a
Oh,
drive
that's
for
fine. It's a short drive.
them. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know where all these suburbs are all the time. So, uh, I want to give you the opportunity to share any last thoughts with us. Anything that you want to put out there that we haven't gotten to talk about, and then also to share how people can connect with Elgin Academy and where they can go if they want to learn more.
Sure. No, thank you. So thank you so much for having us. I think it's what you all are doing in terms of bringing people together and helping people understand each other is the sort of thing that in this time is really important. So thank you
Yeah.
for everything you do. And from our standpoint here at Elgin Academy, like some of our peer schools in the city that are also independent schools, we just really remain committed to this idea of being able to be places that bring people together and help them discover in themselves their passions that will lead them into the world and do things like what you're doing and what this world really desperately needs. And so we really appreciate you having us. And the easiest way to find out about us is to go to elginacademy.org online. And you'll get lots of resources there that'll help you connect with us. And my name is Seth Hanford. And if you have any questions, it's really clear right there how to email me. And we'd love to get anybody who shares our passion for young people out here to see us and to talk about how we might be able to work together and people interested in joining our community.
Yeah. Seth, it's been a great conversation. I
Thank you.
really enjoyed our time together, and thank
Thank
you
you. Me
for
too.
sharing the Elgin Academy story with our listeners. We love talking to educators. I think that they are
Great.
absolutely the most underappreciated group, we put them up there with nurses and first responders, people who just really, I hope that they have everything that they need to do their job,
Yeah.
and I hope that they continue to get resourced and get paid to do those. So,
Yeah. Well,
uh,
thank you for that sentiment, and thank you for having me. I really
yeah,
appreciate it.
so do we. Thanks. We appreciate
Okay.
our listeners, and we thank you for coming back and listening to this episode. You can find all of our past episodes at www.bridgingchicago.com. That includes season 5, which is being released now, and our prior 4 seasons of the podcast. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter, where our handle is at Bridging Chicago. And of course, you can connect with us on LinkedIn by searching Bridging Chicago. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Bridging Chicago podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Bridging Chicago, as produced by the SATC Solutions Center. Nothing contained in this podcast shall constitute financial, investment, legal, and/or professional advice. No professional relationship of any kind is created between you and the podcast host or guest. You are urged to speak with your financial, investment, or legal advisors before making any investment or legal decisions. Furthermore, the opinions expressed in this podcast are not necessarily the opinions of SATC Solutions Center, SATC Law, or any of its employees. This podcast is created by the hosts and guests' individual capacities. All opinions on this podcast are or have been rendered based on specific facts, under certain conditions, and are subject to certain assumptions and may not and should not be used or relied upon for any other purpose, including but not limited to, or use in or in connection with any investment purposes or legal proceeding.